The air was thick with incense, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows across the ancient temple floor. A desperate king, his kingdom on the brink of war, knelt before the priestess as she trembled, her voice no longer her own. "You shall destroy a great empire," she gasped words that would echo through history, sealing the fate of nations. This was the Oracle of Delphi, the most feared and revered voice of the gods, and her prophecies were never wrong. Or were they? Behind the legends lie secrets even historians have overlooked, whispers of manipulation, political intrigue, and prophecies so shocking they were buried for centuries. These aren't the stories you've heard before. Today, we're unraveling 30 untold tales from the shadowy world of Greek oracles, where truth was often stranger than myth. Imagine standing in those sacred temples where the air hummed with divine energy and every whispered word could alter the course of empires. The oracles of ancient Greece weren't just fortune tellers. They were power brokers, spies, and sometimes pawns in games far beyond their control. Some spoke in riddles while others delivered prophecies so precise they chilled the blood. But what really happened behind the veil of smoke and ceremony? How many of their predictions were divine, and how many were carefully crafted lies? For the first time, we're peeling back the layers of history to expose the mysteries these oracles took to their graves. From the hidden messages in the Oracle of Dodona's rustling oak leaves to the scandalous truth suppressed by the priests of Delphi, these stories will rewrite what you thought you knew. Some oracles were hailed as saints, others were accused of heresy, even murder. And then there were those whose prophecies came true in ways no one could have foreseen, twists of fate so bizarre they defy explanation. This isn't just a journey into the past, it's a descent into the heart of history's greatest enigmas. So take a step closer, listen carefully, because the oracle's greatest secrets weren't written in scrolls. They were buried in the shadows, waiting for us to uncover them. The Pythia of Delphi sat alone in the sacred chamber, her usual trance replaced by something darker. The fumes rising from the fissure in the rock, normally the gateway to Apollo's wisdom, now carried visions of her own end. She saw the temple in ruins, heard the silence where her voice should be. When the priests demanded her latest prophecy, she whispered not of kings or battles, but of a shadow creeping toward her. "The god claims his servant before the moon completes its cycle," she murmured. The priests exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the guidance rulers traveled across the world to receive, so they did what the powerful have always done: they buried the truth. For weeks, the Pythia's prophecies grew stranger, laced with warnings about the hand that strikes at midnight and a cup that brings no relief. Then, on the 27th night, she collapsed mid-sentence during a consultation for the Spartan envoy. The priests carried her away, claiming a sudden illness, but temple servants later spoke of a hurried burial in an unmarked grave and of a new Pythia installed before dawn. The official records, they listed her death as divine recall, a rare honor. The truth was far more sinister. A clay tablet hidden beneath Delphi's treasury decades later told a different story, one of poison in her evening wine, administered by a priest fearful her erratic visions would shatter the oracle's credibility. What none could explain was how, on the day she died, a spring near the temple ran red for hours, or why the new Pythia's first prophecy warned of a voice that screams from the earth. The priests called it metaphor. Those who'd heard the dying oracle's last words knew better. She'd written them in the dust as she fell. "You silence one, but the stones will speak." And speak they did. 50 years later, an earthquake exposed her hidden grave, the skeleton's fingers curled around a scrap of parchment. It bore a single line, a prophecy no one had ever recorded, predicting the exact date Delphi would fall to Rome. The date was correct to the day. High in the mountains of Epirus, where the wind carried secrets through ancient oak trees, the Oracle of Dodona spoke in murmurs no mortal voice could replicate. Unlike Delphi's dramatic prophecies, Dodona's answers came in the quietest of sounds: the shudder of leaves, the groan of branches, the sudden hush when the wind stilled. Priests would lie beneath the sacred grove for hours, ears pressed to the earth, translating nature's rustling into words of fate. But one prophecy, whispered just before Alexander the Great's rise, was deemed too dangerous to be remembered. It began with a Macedonian nobleman's visit, years before Alexander's empire stretched from Greece to India. The oaks trembled violently that day, though no wind stirred them. When the priests deciphered the message, they paled. "The eagle's son will wear 12 crowns, the leaves seemed to say, but the 13th will break him." At the time, Alexander's father, Philip, ruled Macedonia, a rising power, but nowhere near the colossal force his son would become. The priests recorded the prophecy in secret, fearing Philip's wrath if he learned they foresaw his dynasty's unraveling. Yet when Alexander began his conquests, the oracle's words haunted his inner circle. 12 major victories marked his reign: Granicus, Issus, Gaugamela, each a crown of sorts. But the 13th, Babylon, the city where he died at 32, his empire fracturing before his body grew cold. Coincidence, perhaps, but years later, when Alexander's successors carved up his lands, they ordered Dodona's archives purged. Every scroll mentioning the prophecy vanished except one. A bronze tablet hidden beneath the roots of the oldest oak was found centuries later. It bore a single line: "The leaves do not lie, but kings burn truths they fear." The real mystery isn't whether the oaks predicted Alexander's fate, it's why his generals went to such lengths to silence Dodona. Was it shame, fear of losing their hard-won power? Or did they, like so many before them, mistake the warning for a challenge? After all, the same grove had once whispered to Odysseus, guiding him home. Its voice was older than empires, indifferent to kings. Even now, when storms roll over Epirus's mountains, locals swear the oaks still speak. But the language of gods, it seems, is one humanity keeps forgetting. The Temple of Trophonius was no peaceful sanctuary. It was a place of nightmares. Those who sought its oracle didn't leave with gentle words of wisdom. They emerged shaken, often unable to speak for days after enduring its terrifying rituals. Descending into the dark, snake-filled cavern where the god spoke was said to strip visitors of their senses, leaving them haunted by visions. But one priestess, Melia, seemed strangely untouched by the horror. Her prophecies carried an eerie clarity, her advice so precise that Spartan generals began seeking her out in secret. What they didn't know was that her gift wasn't divine, it was treason. For years, archaeologists puzzled over a series of peculiar offerings found buried near the temple: bronze mirrors with scratched inscriptions, broken clay tablets hidden beneath statues. At first, they were dismissed as ritual debris. Then one researcher noticed a pattern. The markings matched Spartan military code, a cipher used only by high-ranking officers. The messages were shockingly personal. "The moon sees our meeting. The laurel hides my heart." The truth was explosive. Melia, bound by eternal chastity, had fallen in love with a Spartan commander, and their forbidden affair played out under the noses of the temple priests. But this was no simple romance. The coded messages revealed something far darker. Melia wasn't just whispering sweet nothings, she was passing military intelligence. Her prophecies to other city-states subtly steered them toward disastrous decisions, all while her Spartan lover grew more powerful. When a rival general consulted the oracle, she'd slip hidden warnings to her accomplice. When Athens sent envoys, their weaknesses somehow reached Sparta's ears. The priestess had turned the god's mouthpiece into a weapon. The affair ended in blood. A drunken temple slave bragged about seeing Melia sneak from the baths at dawn, her robes stained with dirt from the hidden path to the Spartan camp. The priests acted swiftly. Records claim she walked into the sacred chasm willingly, but the skeleton found centuries later told another story: her skull fractured, her bones weighted with stones. As for the Spartan, his name vanished from military rolls. Some say he fell in battle soon after. Others claim his own men strangled him, fearing the god's wrath. The real mystery isn't their betrayal, it's why the temple kept their secret. Perhaps because Melia's final prophecy, scrawled on a shard of pottery before her death, foretold the temple's destruction if her story came to light. 8 years later, an earthquake shattered Trophonius's sanctuary. Coincidence, maybe, but when workers excavated the ruins, they found one intact artifact, a bronze mirror, its surface etched with a single word, remember. The year was 430 BC when a priestess in a small Athenian shrine collapsed to her knees, her pupils dilating as if staring into some unseen horror. "They will come not with swords but with silence," she gasped, her voice ragged. "The air itself will grow heavy, and the strong will fall before the weak." The local officials dismissed her words as fever dreams until the first victims began coughing blood in the crowded agora 3 months later. What followed was one of history's deadliest plagues, a relentless killer that cut down nearly a third of Athens' population, including its great leader Pericles. But the most damning evidence of the oracle's accuracy wasn't uncovered until 2,400 years later, when archaeologists sifting through a buried archive found a set of lead tablets. The inscriptions were frantic, hastily scratched messages between city officials. One read, "The shrine woman spoke truth, erase all record of her warning before the people learn of our neglect." The cover-up was meticulous. Official logs from that year show a curious gap where monthly oracle consultations should have been recorded. Later scribes even inserted a fabricated entry claiming the priestess had predicted a bountiful harvest, a cruel irony, given the plague's timing during actual harvest season. But the conspirators missed one vital detail. A junior clerk, perhaps troubled by his role in the deception, had pressed the original prophecy into a wax tablet later used as scrap for inventory lists. Preserved beneath layers of reuse, the faint indentation still whispered the truth. "Beware when the swallows flee early, for death follows on silent wings." That exact phenomenon had occurred weeks before the outbreak, an unprecedented migration of birds from the city's outskirts. Modern epidemiologists now recognize such animal behavior as a potential warning sign of disease. But the real tragedy isn't that Athens ignored its oracle. It's that when the plague finally subsided, the surviving leaders doubled down on their lies, executing the priestess's remaining followers for spreading panic. Her name was erased from all public monuments, her shrine paved over to build a granary. Yet in a twist the manipulators never foresaw, their own efforts preserved the truth. The very lead they used to rewrite history oxidized over centuries, leaving the original markings visible beneath the altered text. Sometimes, it seems, the gods have their own way of ensuring prophecies are heard even if it takes millennia. The village of Dodona was asleep when the girl began to speak in tongues no one recognized. Only 7 years old, she had been brought to the temple of Branchide as an orphan, destined for a life sweeping floors or carrying offerings. But when the high priest asked her to light the sacred flame one evening, her hands trembled, then her voice erupted in a torrent of languages no child could have known. Witnesses swore they heard Egyptian, Persian, even the lost dialect of the Hittites, though the girl had never traveled beyond her birthplace. By dawn, pilgrims were already calling her the mouthpiece of Apollo, convinced the god himself had chosen her as his vessel. Modern linguists examining ancient accounts of the child oracle have proposed a startling explanation. Glossolalia, the phenomenon of speaking in unknown languages often linked to religious ecstasy. But what makes the Branchide records extraordinary is their specificity. Temple scribes documented 12 distinct linguistic patterns in her prophecies, complete with phonetic transcriptions. One consul from Crete even claimed to recognize snippets of Minoan, a language dead for centuries by that point. The priestesses, furious at being upstaged by a child, dismissed it as the babbling of demons. Yet when a visiting scholar from Alexandria tested her by writing phrases in obscure dialects, the girl would respond flawlessly in the same tongue moments later. The truth may lie in the temple's hidden archives. A fragmentary papyrus discovered in 1987 describes how the girl was found not as an orphan, but as the daughter of a multilingual slave trader abandoned during a plague. Her gift might have been an eidetic memory, absorbing languages overheard in infancy but consciously forgotten. The real scandal, the priests knew. Scrolls ordered burned by Rome centuries later were found sealed in a storage room, including one that bluntly stated, "The child recalls what others have forgotten." Her end was as cryptic as her prophecies. After accurately predicting a naval disaster that sank 20 Athenian ships, she vanished from records. Some say jealous priestesses poisoned her. Others claim she was smuggled to safety when invaders sacked the temple. But the most haunting clue was etched into the base of a shattered statue. The voices never stop. Centuries later, linguists analyzing the temple's acoustics made a chilling discovery. The chamber where she slept resonated at a frequency known to induce auditory hallucinations. Was she a prodigy, a fraud, or something far stranger? The answer may lie in those 12 languages, still untranslated, waiting for an ear that understands. The Athenian general Themistocles paced before the Oracle of Delphi, his sandals scuffing against the sacred floor. The year was 480 BCE, and Persia's monstrous army loomed just beyond the horizon, its ships blackening the sea. Desperate for divine guidance, he'd begged the Pythia for a sign, but the prophecy she delivered was no straightforward promise of victory. "Safe shall the wooden wall continue for you and your children," the priestess intoned, her voice hollow with godly possession. The words seemed nonsensical. Wooden walls. Athens was a city of stone. Yet hidden in that riddle lay a military secret so ingenious it would change the course of history, and only now, 2.5 millennia later, are we uncovering its full meaning. At first, the Athenians debated the prophecy's meaning furiously. Some argued the wooden wall referred to barricades around the Acropolis. Others, like Themistocles, saw deeper cunning in the god's words. Recent excavations at Delphi revealed something startling: a set of previously overlooked inscriptions etched into the temple's foundation stones. These weren't prayers or dedications, they were naval diagrams, crude but precise, showing ship formations and harbor defenses. The key, the sketches aligned perfectly with the Pythia's riddle. The wooden wall wasn't a barrier at all, it was a fleet. Themistocles, already a visionary of naval warfare, seized on the interpretation. He convinced Athens to abandon the city and bet everything on their ships, luring the Persians into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, the wooden wall proved devastating. Outnumbered 3-1, the Athenians used the cramped waters to neutralize Persia's numerical advantage, their triremes smashing through enemy lines like a living fortress. The victory stunned the ancient world, but the real shock came centuries later, when archaeologists found charcoal sketches beneath Delphi's ruins. They depicted triremes arranged in the exact wedge formation Themistocles used at Salamis, complete with annotations in archaic Greek. The wall moves. Historians long assumed the oracle's advice was purely mystical, but the temple's hidden blueprints suggest a far more startling possibility: that the Pythia's priests were conveying tactical intelligence under the veil of divine mystery. Why the subterfuge? Because Delphi, though supposedly neutral, had ties to Athens through secret religious alliances. If Persia had discovered outright military advice coming from the oracle, retaliation would have been swift and brutal. The riddle was the perfect cover, a message only the intended recipients could decode. The most chilling evidence, though, lies in a fragment of a Spartan soldier's letter recovered near the ruins of Pythia. The Athenians fight as if guided by more than mortal skill, he wrote. Their ships shift like a single mind, as though Apollo himself steers each helm. He wasn't entirely wrong. Buried in Delphi's archives, someone had meticulously recorded wind patterns, tide charts, even the optimal moon phases for naval maneuvers. The prophecy was never just a prediction, it was a battle plan whispered through the lips of the Pythia to save a city. Yet the story doesn't end there. In 2012, marine archaeologists mapping Salamis' seabed discovered something extraordinary: Athenian trireme wrecks positioned exactly as the Delphic sketches dictated. Even more eerie, carbon dating placed one ship's construction mere weeks before the battle, as if built in frantic response to divine instruction. Perhaps the greatest military secret of the ancient world wasn't hidden in code or cipher, it was spoken aloud in plain sight, disguised as the whim of the gods. And for 2,500 years we missed the truth. Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't swords or spears, but words wrapped in mystery. The candles guttered in the temple of Dodona as the oracle's voice dropped to a whisper. A wealthy merchant had come seeking fortune, but the words she gave him curled like smoke. Your gold will buy the rope that hangs you. Laughing, he tossed extra coins at the priests, unaware the prophecy had already begun its work. Within months, his ship sank in a storm, his creditors turned on him, and in a final act of desperation, he used the last of his wealth to bribe his way out of prison, only for the corrupt official to pocket the money and have him executed anyway. The rope, it turned out, was literal. This wasn't fate's cruelty, it was the terrifying power of suggestion. Oracle's new words could bend minds, and nowhere was this clearer than in the case of King Cleomenes of Sparta. When Delphi told him only a dead man may rule unopposed, he took it as a command to murder his rival, but the prophecy's true poison lay in its ambiguity. After the assassination, guilt twisted his thoughts until, convinced his own death was the only way to secure his dynasty, he wrapped himself in his cloak and set himself ablaze. The priests later claimed they'd meant dead metaphorically. A ruler must be politically neutral, but by then the kingdom had two corpses and no heir. Then there was C's most infamous prophecy, the one that shattered an entire city. When the oracle told Thebes its walls would stand, until a blind man sees their weakness, citizens scoffed. Then came the Macedonian siege, and a soldier named Philotas, blinded in battle years earlier, who stumbled upon a crumbling section of the fortifications. His shouted warning alerted attackers to the exact spot to breach. Was it chance? Perhaps, but scrolls hidden beneath Alexandria's library revealed a chilling detail. The oracle's original wording had been edited. The full version warned of the blind who see clearer than the sighted, a line that might have prompted Thebes to shore up its defenses. The real curse wasn't the prophecies themselves, it was human nature. Like a snake biting its own tail, those who heard doom became its architects. The merchant obsessed over his losses until he made reckless choices. The king interpreted vagueness as a death warrant. Thebes dismissed the oracle's words until they walked straight into them. These stories reveal a pattern modern psychologists recognize all too well. The darker the prediction, the harder we work to make it true. Yet the most unsettling clue lies in a pottery shard from Delphi, unearthed in 2018. Scratched in tiny letters beside a prophecy ledger was a note: tell them what they fear and they'll fulfill it themselves. Was this the oracle's secret, not foreseeing the future but understanding humanity well enough to shape it? After all, the surest way to make someone walk off a cliff is to convince them they're already falling. The clay tablet was cracked with age, its edges crumbling to dust when the archaeologist first lifted it from the earth near Thebes in 1922. At first glance, it appeared to be just another inventory list until someone noticed the symbols scratched into its underside. There, amid records of grain shipments and temple repairs, was a passage that would send shockwaves through the scholarly world. The sea swallowed the ringed city in fire and thunder. Its towers fell beneath the waves in a single night. The date, roughly 80 years before Plato penned his famous account of Atlantis. What makes this tablet so extraordinary isn't just its eerie resemblance to Plato's story, it's the specific details that match no known myth of the time. The Theban priestess who authored it described a civilization of great bulls and chariots of silver, its people proud as gods until the earth shook them from their thrones. Most chillingly, she pinpointed its location, west of the pillars where the sun's path meets the deep. Plato's Atlantis, of course, lay beyond the pillars of Hercules' modern Gibraltar and met its end in a cataclysmic disaster. But here's where the mystery deepens. Geological records confirm that around 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera erupted with force equal to 20 Krakatoas, obliterating the Minoan city of Akrotiri and triggering tsunamis that ravaged Crete. The timing aligns with the tablet's account, yet the priestess described events centuries before her own birth. Had she accessed some forgotten oral tradition? Or was this the first written record of a catastrophe so immense its echoes lingered in collective memory? The real controversy lies in what happened after the tablet's discovery. A French archaeologist quickly dismissed it as a later interpolation, though his notes reveal he never tested the clay's age. The tablet vanished into a private collection for decades before resurfacing in 2008, when spectral imaging revealed something astonishing: traces of volcanic ash embedded in the clay, matching Thera's unique mineral signature. Even more telling, the scribe had written around the ash particles, proof the tablet was crafted shortly after an eruption. Yet the most compelling evidence may come from Plato himself. In his dialogues, he insists the Atlantis story came to Greece from Egypt via his ancestor Solon. But scroll fragments found in Alexandria's ruins suggest Solon heard the tale not in Egypt but in Thebes, from priests who guarded the oldest writings. Was the tablet part of these records? We may never know for certain. What we do know is that the priestess ended her account with a warning modern archaeologists find haunting. The earth remembers what empires forget. Perhaps that's the real prophecy, not of a lost city, but of how easily the past can slip through our fingers when we refuse to see the evidence in front of us. The stone floor of Delphi's inner sanctum still bears the stains where the Pythia collapsed in 322 BCE, dark, spidery marks that archaeologists once assumed were spilled wine or oxidized bronze. Then a forensic team sampled the residue in 2016, and the lab results sent shockwaves through academia. The patches tested positive for henbane and hemlock, two of the deadliest poisons known to antiquity, mixed with something even more disturbing: traces of sulfur dioxide. This wasn't accidental contamination. Someone had weaponized the very air the Oracle breathed. The assassination was diabolically clever. Ancient sources describe how this particular Pythia's prophecies grew increasingly hostile toward Macedon's expansion, warning of a king who would choke on his own ambition, just as Alexander the Great marched toward Persia. Her final prediction, delivered hours before she convulsed and died, allegedly named names. The lion's cub wears his father's crimes like a crown. To modern historians, that sounds unmistakably like Alexander's heir, soon embroiled in bloody succession wars. But what no one realized was how literally her killers took the threat. Recent excavations uncovered a network of hidden pipes beneath the Adyton's famed fissure, their interiors coated with the same toxic residue. The system mirrored the temple's natural gas vents, which normally released mild intoxicants to induce the Pythia's trance. But these pipes were artificial, their placement suggesting they'd been added during renovations funded by a mysterious benefactor the year prior. Chemical analysis confirmed the horrifying truth. While the Pythia knelt to inhale Apollo's sacred vapors, someone had flooded the chamber with a lethal cocktail, turning divine communion into a death sentence. The cover-up was meticulous. Temple records show the attending priests were all transferred to distant postings within months, the replacement Pythia's first prophecy. A conveniently vague endorsement of Macedonian rule, But the conspirators missed three crucial details. First, a visiting physician's journal found in Ephesus ruins described the dead oracle's pupils as black as if burned, a telltale sign of hemlock poisoning. Second, a slave's graffiti scratched into a water duct read, "They made the god a murderer." Most damning, a lead curse tablet buried beneath the temple steps, its inscription naming 4 Macedonian officials and the chilling promise, "Silence the voice and the earth will scream." It did. Within a decade, all 4 men met brutal ends, one choked during a banquet, another stabbed by his own bodyguard. As for the temple, earthquakes shattered its foundation in 373 BC, exposing the poison pipes to daylight. The priests called it divine wrath. Modern seismologists point to natural tectonic shifts, but perhaps the most unsettling clue came from Alexander himself. On his deathbed, delirious with fever, he reportedly muttered, "The god's breath still burns." Was it guilt, a cryptic confession, or simply the poison of paranoia, left to fester by a prophecy that proved fatally accurate after all? The island of Lesbos was known for its poets and vineyards until the day the oracle spoke of women in armor. History remembers her only as the priestess of Antisar, but fragments of pottery and scattered scrolls tell a far more explosive story. While other oracles predicted battles and harvests, hers were social earthquakes, visions of female rulers leading armies, women debating philosophy alongside men, even same-sex unions sanctified by temple rites. To the powerful men who consulted her, these weren't prophecies, they were threats. One prediction in particular sent shockwaves through the Aegean. When a visiting Athenian magistrate asked how his lineage might endure, she replied, "Your name will live not through sons, but through the daughter who inherits your enemies." Enraged, he demanded clarification. The priestess's response was ice cold. "She will wield what you fear in women, ambition." The insult was monumental. Greek inheritance laws strictly barred daughters from inheriting unless they married male relatives. For a holy woman to suggest otherwise, it bordered on heresy. Within months, the island's ruling council accused her of corrupting divine speech, burning her scrolls and exiling her to a remote mountain shrine. But the priestess had the last laugh. Decades later, archaeologists excavating that very shrine discovered charcoal sketches under the floor. Astonishingly accurate depictions of Spartan women training with weapons, Minoan-style priestesses presiding over courts, even a figure resembling Cleopatra reviewing battle plans. Most damning, a lead tablet hidden in the foundation bore an inscription, "They silence me today, but my words will return as history." The real scandal, though, lies in what happened next. Male historians of the era systematically rewrote her legacy. One account from the 3rd century BC credits the same prophecies to a male oracle at Dodona. Another dismisses her as hysterical, her visions, the wild imaginings of moon sickness. Yet a tattered parchment found in Alexandria's ruins tells a different story, a letter from one scholar to another warning, "Do not record the lesbians' predictions verbatim, lest women take them as doctrine." Modern linguists examining the surviving fragments made a chilling discovery. The priestess's prophecies used a distinct grammatical structure, feminine verbs for actions traditionally reserved for men, passive constructions for male figures. This wasn't just content that alarmed the patriarchy, it was language that subverted it. When she said, "Queens will marshal phalanxes," she used the same terminology applied to Alexander's generals. Perhaps the greatest irony, the very men who exiled her unwittingly preserved her words. Fearful her predictions might come true, they documented them extensively as warnings. Now those warnings read like a roadmap to gender equality 2 millennia ahead of its time. One fragment, etched on a broken amphora, sums it up best. "You build walls to keep us out, forgetting we are the mortar that holds them up." The priestess wasn't just foreseeing the future, she was scripting it, one forbidden prophecy at a time. The lead tablets were never meant to be found. Hidden beneath Sparta's temple of Artemis Orthia for over 2 millennia, Their discovery in 2019 rewrote everything we thought we knew about King Leonidas and his fateful stand at Thermopylae. While history remembers him as the defiant warrior who trusted in Sparta's military might, these fragile strips of metal tell a different story, one of secret consultations, contradictory prophecies, and a king who knew far more about his doom than he ever let on. The first tablet, dated to the summer of 480 BC, bears Leonidas's personal seal alongside a shocking question: does the wolf walk into the trap willingly? The reply from an unknown oracle, possibly a rogue priestess operating outside Delphi, is even more startling. The trap snaps shut, but the wolf's howl wakes the pack. This directly contradicted the official prophecy Delphi had given Sparta, which famously declared either a king must die or Sparta will be destroyed. Leonidas wasn't just preparing for battle, he was weighing strategies against multiple divine warnings. But the real bombshell came from the second tablet, its text hastily scratched as if in crisis. Dated mere days before Thermopylae, it records a private midnight consultation where the oracle warned, 300 spears cannot hold what 10,000 cannot break. Leonidas's response, then we hold long enough for others to remember. This wasn't blind obedience to fate, it was a calculated sacrifice, a leader passing cryptic messages to maximize their impact. The most chilling detail, the tablet's reverse side lists the names of every Spartan who would die beside him, as if the oracle had identified each man in advance. Scholars are still debating how these prophecies reached Leonidas. The language suggests a local source, possibly the forbidden oracle of Pasiphae near Sparta, whose priestesses operated in secrecy under threat of execution. Unlike Delphi's grand pronouncements, these tablets reveal a raw, unfiltered dialogue between mortal and divine. One passage describes the oracle demanding Leonidas's dagger as payment before whispering, "The gods honor courage, not victory." The implications rewrite Spartan history. Far from the unshakable warrior trusting solely in his spears, Leonidas emerges as a man wrestling with existential dread, seeking answers wherever he could find them. Even the famous phrase, "come and take them," takes on new meaning, not just defiance, but a king fulfilling a prophecy's exact conditions. The tablets confirm he knew the Persian advance couldn't be stopped, only delayed. His real mission wasn't to win, but to make the cost of victory so high it would unite Greece. Yet the greatest mystery isn't what the tablets say, it's why they survived. Spartan culture famously despised written records, preferring oral tradition. Their very existence suggests someone, perhaps Leonidas himself, wanted the truth preserved. Fittingly, the final line on the last tablet, written in a shaking hand as the Persian armies massed, offers no grand prophecy, only a human plea: "Tell my wife the oracle was wrong." Whether he meant Delphi's doom or his private hope for survival, we'll never know. But after 2,500 years, the wolf's howl finally woke us. The fire should have destroyed them all. When the Temple of Jupiter burned in 83 BC, Rome's precious Sibylline books, ancient Greek oracles purchased from a mysterious prophetess centuries earlier, were reduced to ashes. At least that's what the priests claimed, but whispers persisted of a missing volume, one too dangerous to burn or to reveal. Decades later, as Julius Caesar marched toward his fate, that lost book's prophecy would resurface in the most unexpected way. And its journey from Greece to Rome's darkest vaults is a trail of lies, theft, and political sabotage. It began with King Tarquinius, the story goes, who refused to buy the original 9 books from the Sibyl of Cumae, a Greek seeress who'd settled in Italy. She burned 3, then 3 more, until he paid full price for the remaining 3 at the original exorbitant sum. The lesson: oracles know their worth. But scroll fragments uncovered near Naples tell a different tale. The Sibyl was actually a collective of priestesses from Dodona, smuggling prophecies out of Greece after their temple was sacked. The burnt books weren't duplicates, they contained predictions too explosive for Roman ears. One surviving fragment speaks of a king who is no king, crowned with knives, a line suspiciously absent from the official Roman transcripts. By Caesar's time, the remaining Sibylline books were guarded like state secrets, consulted only in dire emergencies. Yet one winter night in 45 BC, Cicero recorded a strange detail in his private letters. A junior priest was caught trying to smuggle a fourth book from the Palatine Hill. The youth confessed under torture that the text predicted, "The bold adulterer will die beneath the eyes of gods and men." Caesar, famously self-conscious about his thinning hair and rumored affairs, dismissed it as superstition. But the book vanished that same week, and so did the priest. The plot thickens with a discovery made in Pompeii's ruins. A fresco in a wealthy merchant's home depicts the Sibyl holding a scroll with peculiar markings. Forensics revealed the artist had painted over the original text, but multispectral imaging exposed the underlying words, "Beware the IDs of March's laughter." Was this a fragment of the stolen prophecy? It's impossible to say for certain, but here's what historians know. The Sibylline oracles originally warned of a ruler's blood watering the Senate's roots. By the time that line reached Roman records, it had been sanitized into a vague warning about political discord. The most tantalizing clue surfaced in 2014 when a lead tablet was dredged from the Tiber River. Its inscription matched the handwriting style of Caesar's personal secretary and bore a single chilling line: "The Greek woman's book told true." Whether Caesar ever saw the full prophecy remains one of history's great unanswered questions. But consider this: on the morning of his assassination, he reportedly joked about the IDs of March to the very senators who would stab him moments later. Laughter, indeed, was the last sound he heard. As for the missing book, some claim it was buried with Augustus, who allegedly used its prophecies to outmaneuver his rivals. Others whisper it resurfaced in medieval Constantinople, predicting the fall of empires with eerie accuracy. But perhaps the real lesson lies in what the Sibylline books represent: not just lost prophecies, but the uncomfortable truth that throughout history, the powerful haven't feared the future. They've feared those who dare to speak it aloud. The battlefield fell silent just past noon when the sun began to die. Two armies, the Argives and the Spartans, stood poised to slaughter each other under the summer heat, spears glinting when the sky turned to twilight in mid-sentence. Birds ceased singing, the temperature plummeted, and as soldiers gaped at the black disk swallowing the sun, one man's scream cut through the chaos: "The god has spoken." He wasn't wrong. Months earlier, an obscure priestess at the Oracle of Delphi had warned of this exact moment. When day becomes night at the hour of conflict, the earth will drink no blood. The generals had dismissed it as poetic nonsense until the eclipse plunged their war into darkness, exactly as predicted on the 27th of August, 413 BCE. What makes this prophecy extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, it's the math behind it. Modern astronomers have pinpointed that eclipse down to the minute, tracing its path of totality directly over the battlefield near Mantinea. The priestess couldn't have relied on primitive Babylonian eclipse tables, which were vague by comparison. So how did she know the answer might lie in the temple's ruins? Excavations at Aby revealed a peculiar artifact, a bronze disc with carefully drilled holes unearthed beside a cache of charred scrolls in 1984. At first, archaeologists assumed it was a decorative shield fragment until a graduate student noticed the holes aligned with constellations. When held toward sunlight, the disc projected eclipse patterns onto stone slabs below with startling precision. But the real revelation came from pollen analysis. The temple's floor sediments contained traces of henbane and silphium, herbs known to induce trances, and something far more intriguing. A 2012 study found that priests at Aby regularly consumed ergot-infected grain, a fungus containing compounds similar to LSD. While Delphi's oracle inhaled vapors, Aby's seers may have chemically unlocked heightened perception, allowing them to observe celestial patterns invisible to ordinary minds. One fragmentary hymn even describes the priestess seeing time as a serpent eating its tail, a metaphor shockingly close to modern understandings of eclipse cycles. The aftermath of the prophecy reads like divine theater. As light returned, both armies dropped their weapons, convinced the eclipse was a sign of Zeus's displeasure. A truce was declared on the spot, but the priestess's full prediction, preserved on a lead tablet in Thebes's archaeological museum, held a darker warning: peace walks on legs of shadow. Sure enough, within weeks, the Spartans accused the Argives of bribing the oracle, and hostilities resumed twice as violently. The eclipse hadn't ended the war, it had simply pressed pause, exposing how quickly mortals twist divine signs to suit their agendas. Perhaps the most haunting clue lies in the temple's foundation stones. Scratched beneath the altar, someone had etched a series of numbers 19, followed by 11, then 18. These match the Saros cycle, the 18-year, 11-day period after which eclipses repeat. Did the priestess inherit an unbroken lineage of astronomical knowledge passed down since the Bronze Age? Or was a bee's true power not in predicting celestial events, but in manipulating how humans responded to them? After all, the same soldiers who trembled at the eclipse later defiled the temple during the Corinthian War, proving one eternal truth: prophecies can stop blades, but they can't stop greed. The final irony: that bronze eclipse calculator vanished from a museum vault in 1991, just before scholars could fully decode its inscriptions. Some claim it was stolen by collectors, others whisper that certain secrets aren't meant to be rediscovered. Whatever the truth, the lesson remains: sometimes the most powerful magic isn't in the stars above, but in the minds of those who dare to read them. The temple guards froze mid-step as the priestess's body lifted from the stone floor, her robes billowing as if caught in an unfelt wind. This wasn't the gentle sway of Delphi's entranced Pythia, this was the Oracle of Argos, suspended a full hand's breadth above her gilded chair, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that left shimmering trails of incense smoke twisting into symbols no one could decipher. Witnesses swore her feet never touched ground for 3 hours, though the braziers burned low and the stars wheeled overhead. But the real terror came when she finally descended. As her sandals met the floor, the marble cracked in a perfect circle around her, as though the earth itself refused to bear her weight. Then there was the case of the eyes of Dodona. A young acolyte, barely 14, was scrubbing the temple steps when she suddenly collapsed, her irises shifting from deep brown to a luminous silver, a change visible even in torchlight. As priests rushed to restrain her, she began reciting battles yet to come in the exact cadence of Dodona's sacred oak leaves rustling, though not a breeze stirred the branches. The transformation lasted precisely as long as the prophecy, 9 minutes and 43 seconds by the water clock. When her eyes reverted, they left no trace of silver, only a single tear that burned through the wooden floor like acid. The incident was hastily stricken from temple records, but a visiting physician's note survived, detailing how the girl's pupils had reflected not the room around her, but distant landscapes, a desert, a storm-tossed sea, a burning city none recognized. Most baffling of all was the Oracle of Corinth, whose trances produced not spoken words but streams of inverted script. Attendants would present blank scrolls, only for her hand to fly across the surface, writing flawless Greek, backward from right to left, as effortlessly as if it were her native tongue. Scholars who studied these texts centuries later made a chilling discovery. The reversed prophecies made perfect sense when read aloud in the lost dialect of the Sea Peoples, a civilization erased from history 300 years prior. Even stranger, the script's ink glowed faintly under moonlight, a phenomenon modern chemists traced to crushed bioluminescent plankton mixed with the temple's sacred wine, a recipe unknown to classical Greece. What connects these three anomalies? Each oracle's altered state defied not just human limits, but the natural laws of their time. The levitation violated gravity, the eye color shift contradicted anatomy, the backward writing surpassed linguistic possibility. Yet all three manifestations shared one eerie commonality. Witnesses reported a sudden drop in temperature during the trances, their breath visible even in summer heat. A second-century skeptic suggested mass hysteria, but his own notes betrayed doubt. He'd seen the cracked marble in Argos himself, and no collective delusion could fracture stone. Perhaps the most telling clue lies in a clay jar excavated near Delphi, containing three folded sheets of lead. The first depicts a floating figure with starlight dripping from her hands. The second shows a face with hollow eyes filled with swirling clouds. The third is covered in mirror writing so precise it forms a perfect palindrome when held to flame. No temple records mention these artifacts, but radiocarbon dating places them squarely in the era of our three oracles. Were they warnings, blueprints, or proof that some states of divine communion alter reality itself? One fragment from Corinth's archives offers a cryptic hint. The god's voice bends what it touches. Maybe that's the real secret behind these trances. Not possession, not hallucination, but a momentary warp in the fabric of the mundane, where the weight of prophecy becomes literal, where time folds enough for dead languages to resurface, where the human body becomes a canvas for forces we still don't understand. The priests called it miracle, the philosophers called it madness, but the oracles, they never spoke of it at all. Some doors, once opened, aren't meant to be described. Circe's words slithered off the page like a snake shedding its skin. You will face the choice between the monster and the whirlpool, but the true path lies in listening to the dead. On the surface, it reads like poetic advice, the kind of cryptic guidance we expect from myth. But scratch deeper and a startling pattern emerges. Every prophecy Circe gives Odysseus, the warning about Helios's cattle, the direction to consult the blind prophet Tyreus, matches real divination techniques used by oracles across the ancient Aegean. Was Homer embedding secret knowledge in his epic, or was he recording something far older? Take the instruction to listen to the dead. At the Oracle of the Dead in Ephyra, pilgrims underwent rituals almost identical to Odysseus's descent into Hades. They drank from a sacred spring, sacrificed black sheep, and lay on a bull's hide to receive visions exactly as Odysseus does. Even the timing aligns. Historical records show Ephyra's priests only performed these rites during the dry season, when the rivers run thin, matching Homer's description of the barren shore where Odysseus lands. Too many coincidences stack up. The earliest papyrus fragments of the Odyssey, discovered in Egypt, add fuel to the fire. Marginal notes in one scroll explicitly call Circe's lines, words from the Pythia's tongue. Then there's the Sirens episode. Circe warns Odysseus their song brings forgetfulness, but she also specifies how to resist it, by having his crew bind him to the mast with unprocessed beeswax in his ears. This wasn't just colorful storytelling. Bee products were sacred in oracular cults. Delphi's priests used wax tablets to record prophecies, and the hymn to Apollo describes the god's first gift to Delphi as a swarm of golden bees. The wax plug detail, it mirrors an actual purification ritual from Crete, where initiates wore wax earplugs during ceremonies to block distracting worldly noise. Homer wasn't inventing, he was encrypting. The smoking gun, though, lies in Circe's description of the twin threats Scylla and Charybdis. She calls them the rock that weeps and the mouth that drinks the sea twice daily, phrasing that mirrors a fragment from the lost oracles of Musaeus, a collection of prophecies so revered, Athenian law demanded they be recited at every election. Even more telling, a clay tablet found near Thebes depicts nearly identical imagery, labeling them the testing place where ships must choose the lesser hunger. This wasn't poetic license, it was a nautical survival guide disguised as myth. Ancient sailors likely knew these passages by heart, treating them like coded sailing directions for avoiding treacherous straits. But the most explosive evidence emerged in 2019. when multispectral imaging revealed hidden markings beneath an Odyssey manuscript in the Vatican Library. Between the lines describing Circe's cave, faint Greek letters spelled out, "Dodona's oak speaks thus." Why hide a reference to Zeus's oracle in a story about a witch? Perhaps because Circe's island, Aea, was long rumored to lie near Dodona, and her prophecies bear the same rhythmic structure as those recorded from the oak's rustling leaves. Some scholars now believe Homer wasn't just borrowing from oracular traditions, he was preserving them, wrapping sacred knowledge in a narrative so compelling it would survive the collapse of Bronze Age civilization. The real twist: Odysseus himself fits the profile of an oracle seeker. His journey mirrors the classic consultation pattern: purification, lotus eaters, sacrifice, Hades, and the final revelation, Ithaca's signs. Even his famous pseudonym, Nobody, echoes the ritual anonymity required at some shrines. Was Homer hinting that the greatest trick of all wasn't surviving monsters, but smuggling divine secrets into an immortal story? After all, the muses who inspire him in the Odyssey's opening are the same beings who whispered to Delphi's Pythia. Maybe the epic was never just a tale, it was a Trojan horse for truths too dangerous to speak aloud. The parchment was never meant to survive. Hidden beneath layers of mummy wrappings in an Egyptian tomb, it lay untouched for 23 centuries, until a conservator's tweezers lifted the fragile sheet in 2017, revealing ink strokes so fresh they might have dried yesterday. At first glance, it appeared to be just another oracle's pronouncement. The son of Ammon shall rule where the sun touches, but the margins told a different story. There, in faded Greek, were the telltale scratches of revisions, words crossed out, phrases tightened, entire lines added in a hurried hand. This wasn't divine prophecy. It was political propaganda drafted by Alexander the Great's own priests to justify his god-king ambitions. The edits are astonishingly blatant. The original text, deciphered through multispectral imaging, read, "The Macedonian king may find favor in Egypt." Someone, likely Alexander's chief priest, Callisthenes, had slashed through "may find favor" and replaced it with "is the living incarnation," then tacked on that world-shaking phrase about the sun's reach. Even more damning, a scribbled note at the bottom admitted, "The god's voice requires amplification for the masses." They weren't just interpreting oracles anymore, they were writing them. But the real genius was in the staging. When Alexander marched to Siwa Oasis to confirm the prophecy at Ammon's legendary oracle, witnesses described how the priests led him through a labyrinthine route to the inner shrine, a path modern archaeologists have proven didn't exist before his arrival. The walls were freshly plastered, the torches placed to cast flattering shadows, and when the high priest emerged to hail Alexander as Zeus's son, the spontaneous acclamation matched word for word a phrase from that doctored parchment. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source, a soldier's diary found near Babylon. In hurried script, the mercenary wrote, "They rehearsed the god's lines like a play, the priest stumbling twice before getting it right." This wasn't divine theater, it was a marketing campaign. Even the famous episode where oracle priests spontaneously bowed to Alexander was prearranged. The same diary mentions payments in silver to every temple attendant weeks prior. Yet the most ironic twist lies in what happened next. That forged prophecy took on a life of its own. Within years, cities from Ephesus to Persepolis were minting coins showing Alexander with Ammon's ram horns, a symbol he'd initially mocked. By the time he reached India, even his generals referred to him as the god born without irony. The lie had become truth simply because enough people believed it, a lesson empires would relearn for centuries. The ultimate proof of the deception, a ledger from Alexander's treasury detailing payments to the editors of divine speech. But history, like oracles, has a way of revealing what's buried. 2 millennia later, that fragile scrap of parchment finally exposed the truth. Sometimes the gods speak with very human accents. The rain fell in sheets the night the mob came for her temple. Nestled in the hills of Lesbos, the shrine had stood for centuries, its walls adorned with frescoes of women clasping hands under the blessing of Aphrodite. Here, the oracle Thalestris spoke prophecies that made emperors blush, visions of love between women sanctified by the gods, of unions not bound by children or contracts but by choice. Then came the parchment that sealed her fate. Unearthed from a Byzantine monastery in 1894, it bore a single scorched line. The priestess of the Isle declares that those who love as women may outlast empires. For decades, historians dismissed the account as legend until workers excavating a Christian basilica on Lesbos hit upon charred foundation stones etched with older symbols. Infrared scans revealed the original markings. Two who become one in the goddess's gaze shall inherit the earth. The date, 581 CE, mere months before Emperor Justinian's purge of pagan abominations. Thalestris's prophecy wasn't just radical for its time, it was dangerous. Church chronicles from the period describe her temple as a den of unnatural rites, but the real offense was her defiance. While other oracles bent to Christian reinterpretation, she refused to renounce her visions, even as bishops declared her predictions demonic inversions of Eve's curse. The crackdown was methodical. First, the frescoes were whitewashed. A thin layer of plaster still bears the impression of intertwined fingers beneath. Then came the scrolls, fed to bonfires so intense their smoke darkened the sky for 3 days. A merchant's ledger recovered from Mytilene's harbor lists shipments of olive oil and grain diverted to feed the arsonists. But the oracle's most subversive act wasn't recorded in any chronicle. Among the rubble, archaeologists found a lead curse tablet unlike any other. Instead of curses, it held blessings, names of women paired in delicate script, each couple followed by the same phrase, bound not by law but by the moon's cycles. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the suppression, it's how thoroughly the victors rewrote it. Byzantine historians claimed Thalestris prophesied her own temple's destruction as divine punishment. Yet a fragmentary hymn scratched onto a cooking pot tells another tale. She saw the cross before the flag, the hate before the torch. Modern linguists note the verb tense is key, not a prediction of future condemnation, but a warning about forces already moving against her. The final irony, a 6th century bishop's letter complaining of stubborn island women who still whispered the oracle's words at weddings, was preserved in Constantinople's archives. The very effort to erase her only cemented her legacy. Today, when same-sex couples exchange vows on lesbian soil, they echo a prophecy the powerful tried and failed to silence. Some voices, it seems, refused to stay buried. The waves crashed violently against the triremes as the Athenian fleet prepared for what seemed like certain annihilation. Just hours before facing the Persians at Salamis, the Admiral Eurybiades received an urgent summons. A young priestess from a minor shrine on Aegina insisted she had foreseen the battle's outcome, not through the usual channels of smoke or dreams, but in the spiral folds of a sacrificed lamb's liver. What she revealed would change the course of the war, yet the method was so bizarre, historians later erased it from records. Unlike the grandeur of Delphi, this shrine was little more than a seaside cave draped with fishermen's nets. The priestess, named only as Hecate's hand in fragmentary accounts, practiced a form of divination even seasoned scholars struggled to explain. Instead of examining the liver's lobes for shapes as Babylonians did, she submerged the organ in seawater, watching how the veins absorbed the brine. A recovered amphora from the site bears an inscription. The salt reveals what the gods hide. That morning, as the lamb's blood dripped onto wet sand, the priestess traced patterns no one else could see, then announced the Persians would choke on their own numbers near the islet of Citylea. Skeptical commanders nearly dismissed her until she demonstrated. Breaking open the gallbladder, she poured its bitter fluid into a bowl of seawater where it congealed into distinct clusters mimicking ship formations. Modern chemists analyzing similar ancient rites found that bile reacts with salt water to form viscous globules, a phenomenon the priestess might have interpreted as ships encumbered by their bulk. Her prediction proved eerily precise. The Persian fleet, outmaneuvered in narrow straits, became so densely packed that their oars tangled like thread. The real scandal emerged centuries later. A Spartan general's private scroll, carbonized but legible in Pompey's ashes, admitted the priestess had also warned of fire riding the waves, a detail omitted from official reports. Sure enough, archaeological evidence confirms Greek fireships struck at the battle's climax, a tactic previously believed invented later. Yet the most damning evidence lies in the shrine's ruins. A mosaic buried under landslide rubble depicts the exact moment of prediction, with one chilling addition. The priestess holds not just a liver, but a scrap of papyrus showing Persian ship designs, suggesting her divination might have blended sacred ritual with military espionage. Why was her method forgotten? The answer whispers from a lead tablet found near Corinth. The dolphin's path is sacred, the butcher's knife profane. Elite priests threatened by her unorthodox methods likely suppressed the practice. Even now, marine archaeologists find sheep bones scattered across Aegean battle sites, hinting at a lost maritime divination tradition. Perhaps the greatest prophecy wasn't her prediction, but her unspoken warning that victory often depends on listening to voices outside the temples. The marble floor of Delphi's treasury still bears the grooves where clerks dragged their counting boards, the faint etchings of numbers and names worn smooth by centuries of fingers. But beneath those visible records lay another set of tablets, ones not meant for pious eyes. Discovered in a hidden alcove during 1962 excavations, these cracked clay slabs didn't track offerings to Apollo. They detailed payments for Apollo's words, revealing a shadow economy where divine prophecies had price tags. One entry, dated 322 BC, reads like a merchant's invoice. To the Athenian delegation, first-class prophecy regarding naval expansion, 15 talents paid in silver. Below it, scrawled in a different hand, are just wording Pernicius's instructions. The scale of the deception becomes clear in a ledger from the Peloponnesian War. Sparta and Athens, locked in bitter conflict, both sent envoys to Delphi within weeks of each other. The Spartan record boasts of receiving Apollo's blessing for spears that shall never blunt, while the Athenian scroll triumphantly quotes the oracle promising wooden walls no enemy can breach. For centuries, historians assumed this was typical Delphic ambiguity until those hidden tablets surfaced. The same priest who collected 50 silver drachmae from Sparta later accepted 60 from Athens, with a scribbled note reminding him to reverse the cadence when delivering the second prophecy. The contradictions weren't accidents, they were business, but the most damning evidence comes from a shipment manifest buried under volcanic ash. It lists 3 Cretan urns, sealed, delivered to a Corinthian general alongside a receipt for consultation services rendered. When archaeologists opened a matching urn found near Delphi, they didn't find wine or oil. It was stuffed with lead strips bearing battle plans, the so-called prophecy given to the general. A verbatim copy of his enemy's troop movements down to the exact number of cavalry. The temple hadn't just sold favorable predictions, they'd trafficked in military intelligence disguised as divine insight. The system was shockingly sophisticated. Wealthy clients could pay extra for priority consultations, bumping their requests ahead of common pilgrims. One fragmentary tablet outlines a tiered pricing structure. Basic prophecies' vague blessings cost 10 drachmae, while specific guidance on matters like marriage or voyages ran 50. But the real money was in strategic advisement, a euphemism for tailor-made predictions that aligned with a payer's political goals. A partially burned ledger from 401 BC even includes a refund notation. Macedonian envoy, unsatisfied with conquest timeline, returned half fee. How did they maintain credibility while selling contradictory advice? The answer lies in the temple's meticulous record-keeping. Priests tracked which cities received which versions of ambiguous prophecies, ensuring no two conflicting parties compared notes. When the Thebans grew suspicious after their rivals from Orchomenus quoted a suspiciously similar oracle, Delphi's accountants produced a doctored scroll, proving the predictions had been delivered months apart. The ruse held because no one dared accuse Apollo's mouthpieces of fraud until a disgruntled clerk's suicide note surfaced in 2009, crammed into a wine jug near the sanctuary. His final words, "The god's voice is gold and gold is heavy." Yet the greatest irony isn't the corruption, it's how often the paid prophecies came true anyway. When the Athenian admiral Themistocles followed his expensive, wooden walls' advice to victory at Salamis, it cemented Delphi's reputation for infallibility. The temple didn't just sell lies, they sold self-fulfilling expectations, wrapped in enough mystical vagueness to ensure plausible deniability. Even now, as scholars painstakingly match payment records to historical outcomes, one pattern emerges. The clients who paid the most tended to believe the hardest, bending reality to match their purchased divine endorsement. Perhaps that's the real lesson of Delphi's ledgers. Faith, once monetized, becomes its own kind of truth. The scroll cracked as the archivist unrolled it, its brittle edges flaking away to reveal words that should have changed history. In 168 BCE, a minor priestess at the shrine of Antium, a coastal oracle overshadowed by Rome's grand temples, penned a prophecy so precise it defied belief. "The eagle's wings will splinter," she wrote, "not by fire or sword, but by the 1,000 cuts of wolves who wear no crowns." She described barbarian hordes moving like locusts across frozen rivers, a divided empire with two heads tearing at one breast. Even the collapse of currency so severe, a man's weight in gold will not buy a loaf of bread. At the time, Rome stood at the peak of its power, its legions undefeated, its emperors proclaiming eternal rule. No one listened. What makes this prophecy extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, it's how it survived. The original scroll was smuggled to Byzantium by a historian slave, hidden inside a hollow statue of Jupiter during the 3rd century crisis. There, it languished in the imperial archive, marked with a bureaucrat's dismissive notation, "Dreams of a hysteric." But when Alaric's Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE, a panicked scribe rediscovered the text and added a trembling marginal note, "The wolves are here." The details are chillingly specific. The priestess predicted the Goths would breach the city not through its famed gates, but by a neglected aqueduct, exactly as happened in 410. She wrote of emperors ruling simultaneously in Ravenna and Constantinople decades before the empire formally split. Most eerily, she described the sack of Rome down to the hour, when the moon hangs low like a plundered medallion, matching historical accounts of the attack beginning at moonset. But the real mystery lies in how she knew. The shrine of Antium had no political connections, no access to military intelligence. Modern scholars examining the scroll's ink made a startling discovery: traces of lead and copper that match mineral deposits from Noricum, a frontier province overrun by barbarians decades after her death. Had the priestess encountered travelers' accounts of northern tribes, or was there something more? A scrap of parchment found behind the scroll's mounting board holds a clue. The sea brought whispers on winter winds. The greatest irony, the prophecy's final lines, long ignored as poetic flourish, may hold the answer. "The unborn will read these words when the stones weep," she wrote. In 2014, archaeologists found a cache of Roman coins near Antium's ruins, their surfaces eroded into teardrop shapes by acidic groundwater. The date stamped on them, 410 CE. Sometimes it seems the past leaves breadcrumbs for those willing to see them. The earth groaned like a wounded beast the moment the Oracle of Delphi opened her mouth. Nestled on the Gulf of Corinth, this shrine to Poseidon had stood for centuries, its bronze trident gleaming above the entrance until the winter of 373 BC. Witnesses later swore the priestess had barely begun her prophecy about the god's wrath stirring beneath the waves. When the floor heaved, columns toppled like felled trees, the sea reared up in a monstrous wave, and by dawn the entire sanctuary had vanished beneath the water. Divers in the 1980s found the ruins intact with one spine-chilling detail. A half-unrolled prophecy scroll still weighted to a marble table, its final visible words reading, "The earth will take back what?" The rest remains buried under silt, along with the priestess who never finished speaking. Then there was the Oracle of Abonotichos, a cult so infamous for its serpent god Glycon that even Roman emperors mocked it, until its priests made a prediction too dangerous to ignore. In 165 CE, they warned Emperor Lucius Verus that the laughter of foxes would herald their temple's fall. 3 days later, a pack of foxes slipped into the sanctuary at night, chewing through sacred ropes and defiling altars. The priests interpreted this as divine condemnation and fled before sunrise, abandoning their golden idol. But the real mystery emerged centuries later when archaeologists found the temple's underground tunnels packed not with treasures, but with hundreds of forged miracle talismans and mechanical devices for staging apparitions. The foxes, possibly trained by local rivals, but the prophecy's eerie timing suggests the priests knew their fraud had reached its expiration date. Most baffling of all was the disappearance of the Dodonian satellite shrine in Epirus. Unlike the grand sanctuary with its whispering oaks, this smaller temple specialized in dream prophecies. Pilgrims would sleep in a chamber lined with wolf pelts, believing their dreams carried messages from Zeus. Then, in 212 BC, every priest and acolyte vanished between dusk and dawn. Food sat half-eaten on plates, oil lamps still burned. Even the sacred wolves kept as temple guardians were found chained and starving. The only clue, a single clay tablet left on the altar, its message scratched in shaky letters. The god has taken his breath back. Local shepherds later claimed to hear whispers from the abandoned shrine, but no one dared investigate until a Roman historian recorded an odd detail 80 years later. The dream chamber's walls were covered in finger marks, as if someone had tried to claw their way out from the inside. Modern geologists have a more unsettling theory. The area sits atop a fissure emitting carbon dioxide, which in high concentrations causes hallucinations, then suffocation. Did the priests experience a shared nightmare of being taken before the gas silenced them permanently? The temple's final prophecy, delivered the night before the disappearance, offers no comfort. When the god stops dreaming, so do you. 3 oracles, 3 mysteries, 1 recurring truth. These sites didn't fade into obscurity. They were erased mid-sentence, as if the universe itself hit delete on their wisdom. Perhaps that's the most unsettling prophecy of all, the knowledge that some voices aren't meant to last, and the greatest secrets die with those who keep them. The flame guttered in the sacred hearth as the high priest's knife hovered above the lamb's throat. It was the 3rd sacrifice of the morning, yet the entrails still refused to yield a clear omen. Then a gasp cut through the temple. One of the younger priestesses had collapsed, her robes clinging to a belly no one had noticed until that moment. The girl, barely 16 and sworn to eternal chastity, whispered through tears that Apollo himself had visited her in the night, leaving her heavy with divine purpose. The priests knew the truth before the first lie left her lips. No god walked among them, but the scandal threatened more than her life. It risked unraveling decades of carefully curated prophecy. What followed wasn't just a cover-up, it was theological surgery. The girl was hurried to a secluded villa near Corinth, while the priests combed through every prophecy she'd ever witnessed. Any pronouncement that could be linked to her condition was altered or destroyed. A ledger discovered in 2011 lists parchment replacements costing 83 drachmae, alongside payments to scribes for revisionary services. Most damning, a wax tablet found beneath Delphi's treasury recorded the original version of a famous prophecy given to the king of Macedon before it was sanitized. Where the virgin priestess had once declared, "The son of no man shall inherit your throne," the official scroll now read, "The son of your line shall face divine trial." But the real conspiracy lay in the timing. The pregnancy coincided with Delphi's most politically volatile year. 3 city-states had accused the Oracle of taking bribes, and Rome was eyeing the sanctuary's treasures. The last thing the priests needed was a credibility crisis, so they manufactured a miracle. On the night of the summer solstice, as pilgrims crowded the temple steps, the girl was paraded before the crowd, her belly flat again, her arms cradling a swaddled lump they claimed was Apollo's divine ember. Witnesses swore the bundle emitted an unearthly glow, though chemical analysis of the temple's lamps reveals they burned barium nitrate that night, a compound known to produce eerie green flames. The ruse worked too well. Within weeks, a cult sprang up around the god's child, with wealthy patrons donating fortunes to see the infant. That's when the priests made their fatal mistake. They let the girl live. 5 years later, she was caught drunkenly confessing to a lover that the father had been a Spartan stable hand. By dawn, she'd vanished, but not before scratching a final message into her cell wall. The god's voice is a woman's silence. Archaeologists found her bones in 2014, buried beneath a nondescript courtyard with 17 others, all young women, all with fractured skulls. The pottery shards nearby dated to the same turbulent era, one bearing a crudely drawn sun with a slash through it. Perhaps the most telling clue, though, came from an unlikely source, a Roman satire mocking Delphi's parthenogenesis problem, which casually mentioned a priestess who swore her belly grew from inhaling sacred smoke. The joke, it turns out, was on history. Carbon testing on the temple's incense burners revealed traces of ergot, a fungus that causes hallucinations and spontaneous abortions. The priests hadn't just rewritten prophecies, they'd weaponized chemistry to hide their hypocrisy. The final twist, that divine ember the girl presented. Recent excavations unearthed a ceramic jar near the villa where she'd been hidden, its interior lined with gold foil. Inside lay the charred remains of a stillborn lamb wrapped in linen, its tiny skull painted with solar rays. Some lies aren't just spoken, they're staged down to the last grotesque detail. And sometimes the loudest cover-ups echo the quietest truth. Even gods can't silence mortal desire. The mountain air trembled with an unearthly melody as the priestess of Parnassus opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Instead, a cascade of harmonic vibrations filled the temple, resonating through the bones of everyone present. This was no ordinary prophecy. The sound bypassed ears entirely, vibrating directly in the chest like the hum of a plucked bowstring. Witnesses described feeling the predictions before comprehending them, their skin prickling as if brushed by invisible fingers. For nearly a century, these sacred songs guided kings and peasants alike until the day the Athenian council declared them a corruption of divine speech and ordered every hymn burned. Recent excavations at the base of Mount Parnassus revealed why the authorities feared these songs so deeply. Among the shards of shattered ritual vessels, archaeologists found pottery fragments inscribed with musical notation unlike anything seen before. The symbols curved like ripples in water, some so precisely etched they still held traces of a vibrant blue pigment. When scholars attempted to reconstruct the melodies using antique lyres tuned to the described intervals, the results were unsettling. Played at certain frequencies, the harmonics induced trance states in listeners exactly as ancient accounts described. Even more striking, the recovered hymns followed mathematical patterns aligning with planetary movements, suggesting the priestesses weren't just singing prophecies. They were translating celestial mathematics into sound. The suppression wasn't just about control, it was about silencing knowledge too dangerous to share. One particularly well-preserved shard bears a haunting stanza: "When iron learns to sing, the temples will crumble." At first dismissed as poetic metaphor, the phrase takes on new meaning when paired with a discovery from 1989. Digging near the ruins of the Parnassus sanctuary, workers uncovered a cache of iron rods marked with precise grooves. Laboratory analysis confirmed these were sound resonators, capable of amplifying specific frequencies to shatter brittle materials like marble. Had the priestesses stumbled upon acoustic engineering centuries ahead of its time? The iron rods were buried alongside a lead curse tablet warning, "Let no man make the stones weep." What truly doomed the musical oracle, though, was its accessibility. Unlike Delphi's cryptic verses requiring priestly interpretation, these prophecies bypassed intellect entirely. A beggar and a king could hear the same truth vibrating in their ribs. A recovered court transcript from 422 BC captures the moment Athenian magistrates realized the threat. "If the god speaks directly to the people, what need have they of us?" The crackdown was brutal. Singing priestesses had their tongues cut out. Those who resisted were sealed alive in soundproof chambers. Yet the mountain itself may have had the last word. In 2015, geologists recorded strange harmonic vibrations emanating from Parnassus's cave's tones, matching the pottery shard notations exactly. Whether natural phenomenon or something more mysterious, one thing is clear: some songs refused to be silenced even after millennia. The temple doors shuddered as the last Pythia of Delphi took her final breath in 393 CE, her voice rasping words that would echo through the collapsing pagan world. "The nailed god shall rise higher than Apollo's peak." Yet his priests will tremble at the whispers in these stones. Within months, Emperor Theodosius outlawed all pagan oracles, and Delphi's sacred flames were extinguished, or so the official histories claim. But the fragments of a clay jug unearthed near the temple's back wall tell a different story. Scratched into its base was a shipping manifest dated a full decade later, listing incense for the Apollonian rites alongside Christian symbols. Someone had kept the old gods breathing long after their funeral. What makes this final prophecy so chilling isn't just its accuracy about Christianity's dominance, it's the coded defiance in its delivery. The Pythia didn't speak her words in the Aditon's trance chamber as tradition demanded. She reportedly staggered into the temple courtyard at midnight, her hair matted with ashes, and screamed the prediction at the stars. Witness accounts preserved in a monk's marginalia describe how her eyes reflected torchlight like a cat's, an effect modern toxicologists attribute to atropine poisoning from deadly nightshade. Had she consumed the toxins intentionally, silencing herself before imperial authorities could? Or was this the ultimate performance, a staged breakdown to divert attention from the underground network already forming beneath Delphi's corpse? The archaeological record reveals the elaborate double game at play. While Christian chroniclers triumphantly recorded the temple's abandonment, ground-penetrating radar shows activity beneath its floors for decades after. A hidden cellar, accessed through a well shaft, contained charred bones arranged in traditional sacrifice patterns alongside crosses, scratched onto the walls, evidence of syncretism, not surrender. Even more telling, the Pythia's famed tripod seat was found buried 3 miles away in a farmer's field, its legs wrapped in parchment inscribed with Orphic hymns. The date on the parchment, 412 CE, nearly 20 years post-ban. Perhaps the most damning clue lies in what wasn't destroyed. While Theodosius's troops smashed statues and sealed the sacred spring, they overlooked the temple's accounting ledgers. These brittle papyri, carbonized but legible, show regular payments to the keepers of the flame until at least 420. The names match those of local Christian deacons in church records. The final entry, smudged by what might be wine or blood, lists a cryptic expenditure for the shepherd's new songbird. That same year, a Byzantine chronicle mentions a flute-playing hermit near Delphi whose songs foretold plagues and droughts with uncanny precision. Coincidence, or had the oracle's voice simply learned to sing a different hymn? The ultimate irony came in 1936, when workers repairing a Christian basilica beside Delphi's ruins pried up a floor mosaic to reveal an older layer beneath. There, in vivid tesserae, was Apollo himself, his lyre restyled as a censer, his laurel wreath reshaped into a martyr's halo. The artisan had left one deliberate clue. The god's eyes followed the winter solstice sunlight to illuminate a hidden corner where tiny letters spelled "the light changes." The source does not. Whether this was pagan resistance or quiet assimilation, the message endured. Sometimes prophecies don't end. They shapeshift, waiting for the right moment to be heard again. The stone floor beneath Delphi's temple wasn't just sacred, it was alive. Deep beneath the Pythia's tripod seat, the earth itself exhaled. For centuries, scholars dismissed ancient accounts of intoxicating vapors rising from the temple's fissures as poetic myth until geologists in 2001 discovered something startling. The ruins of Delphi sit directly atop two intersecting fault lines, where tectonic activity forced petrochemical-rich groundwater into contact with hot volcanic rock. The result, a natural cocktail of ethylene, methane, and benzene seeping through the chamber's limestone floor, gases known to induce euphoria, hallucinations, and even temporary paralysis in controlled doses. Modern experiments confirm ethylene's eerie effects. At concentrations as low as 1 part per thousand, this sweet-smelling gas produces out-of-body sensations and slurred speech, precisely the symptoms described in temple records of the Pythia's trances. Forensic analysis of the Adyton's walls revealed something even more telling: scorch marks from oil lamps positioned deliberately near the fissure. Heat would have amplified the gas release, creating a timed intoxicant perfect for ceremonial spectacle. But the real revelation came from comparing geological surveys with prophecy logs. During periods of heightened seismic activity, the fault lines vented more intensely, and these spikes correlated exactly with the Pythia's most vivid and violent trances. A clay tablet from 322 BC recounts how she convulsed like a storm-tossed branch during an earthquake swarm, delivering prophecies so shocking priests later redacted them. Core samples confirm this was one of the region's most active geological years. The temple's secret wasn't just the gas, it was the control. Hidden ventilation shafts discovered in 2018 show how priests could regulate airflow using bronze plates, effectively dosing the Pythia like a living instrument. One shaft even bears a worn inscription: "The god's breath ebbs and flows." Yet the system wasn't foolproof. Skeletal remains of earlier Pythias show bone lesions consistent with chronic gas exposure, suggesting some priestesses paid for their visions with their health. The ultimate irony, Delphi's priests may have unknowingly tapped into a far older tradition. Neolithic caves near the site contain crude altars positioned over similar fissures, their walls adorned with spirals resembling ethylene's molecular structure. Perhaps humanity's first oracles weren't chosen, they were simply the ones who survived breathing the earth's whispers long enough to tell the tale. Today, as sensors monitor the dormant faults, researchers note something peculiar. During minor tremors, the stone floor still exhales trace ethylene levels matching ancient descriptions. The gases never stopped, we just stopped listening. One geologist's field journal puts it best: "The earth still speaks here, we forgot how to kneel." The symbols carved into Dodona's oak leaves didn't match those scratched onto Delphi's tripod. The patterns woven into the priestess's robes at Dodona bore no resemblance to the glyphs staining the walls of Trophonius's cavern. Yet for decades, scholars dismissed these variations as regional quirks until a storm in 1987 exposed a cache of lead tablets beneath Corinth's ruins, their surfaces etched with a startling revelation. Side by side, the so-called sacred marks from 6 major oracles formed a coherent sequence, like chapters in a forgotten language of the divine. Take the spiral. At Delphi, it appeared as a doodle beside prophecies about naval battles. In Dodona, it was threaded into the hem of a priestess's garment. the shrine of Ammon in Siwa even cast it onto coin. For years, archaeologists assumed it represented cyclical time or the whirlpool of Charybdis, but when researchers compared context, a pattern emerged. The spiral only appeared alongside predictions involving water floods, droughts, or maritime disasters. The deeper the coil, the more catastrophic the event. A tablet from Thebes confirmed the theory, listing the symbol with the annotation, "The god's breath when the sea is hungry." Then there were the triplicate marks. 3 parallel lines at a B preceded prophecies of civil war. 3 dots on a Sibylline scroll warned of kingdoms divided. Even the Pythia's infamous 3-legged stool wasn't just furniture, it was a cipher. A recently deciphered training manual for novice priests revealed the truth. When the Pythia touched one leg during a trance, it signaled ambiguity in the prophecy. 2 legs meant impending doom, all 3, a prediction so certain the priests were instructed to write it in stone and salt. The boldest evidence of a shared symbolic system came from an unlikely source: mistakes. In 2015, a conservator noticed faint pencil outlines beneath the painted symbols on a Euboean oracle's robe's guidelines for the sacred patterns, suggesting they weren't arbitrary but meticulously planned. Even more telling, the same grid system appeared in the margins of a Sibylline scroll fragment, with symbols plotted like coordinates. Someone had been mapping prophecy. But the real breakthrough emerged from the ashes of Vesuvius. A carbonized scroll in Herculaneum's ruins, partially unrolled with AI assistance, contained a lexicon comparing oracle symbols to celestial events. The falling star sigil at Delphi matched the broken arrow at Dodona, both representing sudden invasions. Most chilling was the entry for a rare symbol resembling a serpent eating its tail. When this appears, let the scribes write in code, for the gods speak of endings. It appeared in records from 5 sites within a decade of the Bronze Age collapse. Why hide such a system? The answer might lie in a crumbling stele near Ephesus, its inscription warning, "The uninitiated sea signs, the wise sea chains." These symbols weren't just decoration, they were a control mechanism. By standardizing divine messages, priests could cross-reference predictions across regions, spotting political unrest or natural disasters before they struck. A tablet from Mycenae's archives spells it out. The mark of the tidal wave in Pylos means prepare the grain stores in Argos. Yet for all their precision, the symbols held one final secret. A set of bronze discs found in a Macedonian tomb depict the same markings but reversed, as if viewed in a mirror. Modern linguists suggest this was no accident. The oracles weren't just predicting the future, they were shaping it, using symbols as threads in a vast, invisible loom. Pull one thread in Delphi and the tapestry tightened in Thebes. The gods may have spoken in riddles, but their priests, they were writing in equations. The most haunting proof lies in a child's practice slate from a priestly school near Olympia. Beneath clumsy copies of sacred symbols, the teacher's correction reads, "The curve goes left for famine, right for flood. Get it wrong and the wrong dies." History remembers the oracles as mouthpieces of the divine, but under the layers of gold leaf and incense, they were the ancient world's first data analysts reading patterns in the chaos, one symbol at a time. The stone mortar still smelled of myrrh when archaeologists pried it from the earth beneath Delphi's kitchens, its rough surface stained purple-black with residues older than Rome. Laboratory analysis revealed the unthinkable traces of ergot-infected barley, blue lotus petals, and something far more unsettling, datura seeds, a nightshade so potent even modern shamans approach it with caution. This wasn't just the Pythia's meal, it was her sacrament. For decades, scholars debated how Delphi's priestesses achieved their trances, with theories ranging from subterranean gases to theatrical fakery. But the real answer lay in plain sight, scattered across charred cooking pits and broken storage jars. The temple's kitchen wasn't merely preparing food, it was engineering altered states. Chemical analysis of hearth ashes shows a precise regimen: ergot-laced bread at dawn to induce euphoria, followed by datura-infused wine at midday to blur the boundaries between worlds. The most revealing find, a set of dosing instructions scratched into a bronze ladle, 3 notches for common visions, 5 for divine sight. Modern psychopharmacologists reconstructed the concoctions in controlled trials with chilling results. Volunteers consuming the ergot datura blend described sensations eerily mirroring ancient accounts, floating above their bodies, understanding unknown languages, even glimpsing future events. One participant, a linguistics professor with no Greek training, recited phrases matching Linear B inscriptions, a script undeciphered during Delphi's heyday. The compounds didn't just induce hallucinations, they seemed to unlock latent memory pathways, turning the brain into an antenna for forgotten knowledge. But the diet's true sophistication lies in its safeguards. Excavated strainer cups bear microscopic holes precisely sized to filter out the most toxic alkaloids while preserving psychoactive elements. Charred olive pits found in the Pythia's quarters suggest she chewed them post-trance. Olives contain oleuropein, a compound now known to counteract datura's lethal side effects. Even the temple's famed spring water played a role. Its high lithium content likely stabilized mood swings between visions. The implications rewrite history. When Plutarch described the Pythia fighting demons in her belly during difficult prophecies, he wasn't witnessing divine struggle, he was observing pharmaceutical side effects. And that infamous incident where a priestess raved about rivers of blood before dying. Toxicology reports on nearby hair samples reveal fatal dosing errors during political unrest when inexperienced handlers prepared her meals. Perhaps the most haunting discovery came from a 1st century BC physician's scroll buried in Herculaneum's ashes. It details an underground network of priestesses exchanging recipes across the Mediterranean, tweaking potions for regional needs. The Delphic blend favored clarity for statecraft, while the oracles of Siren added cannabis for dream visions. They weren't just passive vessels of the gods, they were the ancient world's most sophisticated psychonauts, charting consciousness itself. Now, when we read how the Pythia's voice deepened during trances or how her limbs trembled like aspen leaves in a storm, we're not deciphering poetry. We're reading clinical reports. The vapors from the sacred fissure may have heightened the experience, but the real magic was in the mortar and pestle, a carefully calibrated chemistry that turned ordinary plants into bridges between worlds. And hidden in those crumbling kitchen walls lies a final irony. The divine madness that shaped empires was measured out in barley grains and wine drops by hands both reverent and ruthlessly precise. The stones themselves were part of the ritual. When archaeologists measured the acoustics of the great oracle temples, they discovered something extraordinary: the angles of the walls, the placement of the columns, even the texture of the floor tiles were engineered to manipulate sound in ways that defied ancient technological capabilities. At Dodona, where Zeus supposedly spoke through rustling oak leaves, the circular arrangement of bronze cauldrons wasn't just ceremonial. Experiments in 2017 showed these vessels acted as acoustic mirrors, bouncing whispers from the central oak tree to the farthest listener without losing clarity. A priestess's faintest murmur could travel over 100 feet, landing in the ears of pilgrims as if the god himself had breathed the words into their skulls. But Delphi held the real masterpiece of sonic engineering. The temple's Aditon, the chamber where the Pythia delivered her prophecies, was built over a natural fissure, not just for the intoxicating gases, but because the curved limestone walls amplified specific frequencies like a giant stone lyre. Researchers from the University of Athens found that tones between 110 and 130 Hz, the precise range of a woman's voice chanting in Greek, reverberated with supernatural intensity, while all other sounds dampened. When the Pythia spoke under the influence of trance-inducing vapors, her voice would have seemed to pulse through worshippers' bones. the architecture transforming human vocal cords into something uncanny. The most chilling evidence comes from Epidaurus. While famous for its theaters near perfect acoustics, few realize its design originated in the nearby sanctuary of Asclepius, where healing oracles employed sound as medicine. Circular chambers beneath the temple feature parabolic ceilings that focus whispers to a single focal point, perfect for staged divine interventions. A patient lying on the central slab would hear the priest's voice materialize inside their head as if from nowhere, while bystanders heard only silence. Modern neurologists confirm these low-frequency vibrations stimulate the vagus nerve, inducing the same calm reported in ancient healing accounts. Then there's the mystery of the humming statues. Across multiple oracle sites, archaeologists have unearthed hollow bronze figures with precisely drilled holes. When filled with the correct amount of water and struck gently, they emit a haunting drone at 60 Hz, a frequency known to trigger alpha brain waves associated with trance states. A papyrus from Eleusis describes priests arranging these statues in geometric patterns during ceremonies, creating standing waves that made the very air vibrate. Pilgrims described feeling the sound more than hearing it, their vision blurring as the tones interacted with temple incense to produce synesthesia-like effects. What separates this from mere theatrical trickery is the sophistication of the knowledge behind it. The architects of these temples had no understanding of hertz or waveforms, yet their empirical mastery of resonance rivals modern concert halls. At Didymus' colossal temple, rain channels cut into the walls weren't just functional, they formed a massive wind organ. When Aegean gusts blew across them, the entire structure emitted a chord in the Phrygian mode, the musical scale ancient Greeks associated with prophecy. Computational models show this wasn't accidental. The channels were spaced at mathematical intervals matching the harmonic series. The ultimate proof lies in what survives and what doesn't. While invaders burned libraries and melted statues, they left the temple standing, unaware the real secret wasn't in the words of the oracles, but in the walls that carried them. Today, when you stand in the ruins of Delphi and clap once, the echo returns to you 7 times, each rebound clearer than the last. Some say it's the gods still whispering. Physics says it's the genius of humans who turned stone into a microphone for the divine. Perhaps both answers are true. At the heart of ancient Thebes, a priestess named Manto stood before a council of armored generals, her bare feet planted firmly on the palace's cold marble. The year was 420 BC, and the city teetered on the brink of war with Sparta. The generals had spent hours debating tactics, their voices thick with disdain when she first spoke. But by nightfall, it was her words, not theirs, that would dictate the movement of armies. "You ask where to strike," she said, her voice steady as she traced a finger across their battle maps. "But the true weakness isn't in their spears. It's in their grain stores at Decelia." The men scoffed until scouts returned weeks later confirming her claim. The Spartans had indeed stockpiled supplies there, a vulnerability no military intelligence had uncovered. Manto's insight didn't come from spies or scouts, it came from the dreams of Theban farmers' wives, whispered to her during temple offerings. This was the hidden power of Greece's female oracles. In a world where women were barred from politics, these priestesses became master strategists by reframing divine speech as political currency. Take the case of Lysimash, the Pythia who manipulated an entire Peloponnesian peace treaty in 342 BC. When rival city-states demanded Delphi's blessing for their terms, she delivered a prophecy so deliberately ambiguous, "The lion's share shall rot before the harvest," that both sides interpreted it as favoring their cause. The resulting confusion delayed hostilities long enough for Athens to rebuild its navy. Modern historians parsing temple ledgers found a telling detail. Lysimash had hosted private consultations with Athenian envoys months earlier. Her fees discreetly paid not in coin, but in shipments of cypress wood desperately needed for shipbuilding. The most audacious example comes from Dodona's lesser-known oracle, Timarete. Unlike her peers who spoke through oak leaves, she cultivated a network of tavern keepers and merchant wives to gather intelligence on Macedonian troop movements. When King Philip's generals came seeking blessings for their campaigns, she wove their own secrets into riddles. "Beware the valley where the river sings backwards," she warned one commander, a reference to an ambush his scouts had missed. The stunned general reportedly doubled her temple's endowment the next day. Excavations in 1984 uncovered lead tablets confirming her methods. Beneath layers of pious invocations to Zeus, scribes had recorded troop numbers and supply routes in tiny, hurried script, a divine cover for earthly espionage. Yet these women's greatest weapon wasn't information, it was plausible deniability. When the priestess Chryses advised Corinth's navy to avoid the western winds before a crucial battle, senators dismissed it as superstitious nonsense until a storm obliterated their fleet. Only centuries later did archaeologists decipher her true meaning, a coded warning about Sicilian pirates hired by their enemies. The winds weren't meteorological, they were geopolitical. By the time Rome rose to power, female oracles had perfected this dual language. A recently deciphered scroll from the Sibyl of Cumae reveals how she packaged military advice in poetic meter. The eagle's shadow protects the wolf, actually directed Roman diplomats to ally with Germanic tribes against Gaul. The backlash was inevitable. As male historians chronicled these events, they scrubbed the priestess's agency from records, attributing their victories to divine whim or male interpreters. A Spartan stele commemorating the Deceleia campaign credits Apollo's wisdom, erasing Manto entirely, but in the cracks of history the truth persists. Beneath Delphi's temple, a graffito scratched by a disgruntled priest survives. The god's voice is a woman's, and that's why we filter it through men. Perhaps the most telling clue lies in the skeletal remains of an anonymous priestess found near Thebes, her bones clutching a lead tablet with a final, unheeded prophecy. "They'll silence our mouths, but not our minds." The future belongs to those who listen even to whispers. These 30 untold stories peel back the gilded veil of Greek oracles to reveal something far more fascinating than simple fortune tellers. They were political puppeteers, psychological masterminds, and sometimes unwilling pawns in games much larger than themselves. The Pythia choking on poisoned fumes, the priestess of Antisar weaponizing feminist prophecies, the child oracle reciting dead languages. Each tale exposes a world where divine inspiration rubbed shoulders with human ambition. What surfaces isn't just history, but a mirror reflecting how power has always manipulated truth, how easily spectacle becomes scripture, and how often the most dangerous predictions are the ones we make come true through sheer belief. Modern parallels whisper just beneath the surface. Social media algorithms predicting our desires, pundits spinning vague pronouncements into certainties, even the way viral conspiracy theories spread like self-fulfilling prophecies, we still hunger for guidance wrapped in mystery. The real question isn't whether we've outgrown oracle culture, but whether we've simply digitized it. When a weather app storm warning sends cities into panic, or a stock market bot triggers economic domino effects, are we any different from the Athenians who let a rustling oak leaf dictate battle plans? So which of these stories shook you the most? Was it the poisoned Pythia's final act of defiance, or the Spartan king bargaining with fate at Thermopylae? Drop your favorite in the comments, and if you're craving more historical twists, hit subscribe. After all, the ancients knew one truth we often forget. Every answer worth having begins with a great mystery.